Hello, everyone, and welcome to Financial Autonomy for Women, the podcast. My name is Maureen Paley. I'm a life, career, and financial coach. And as always, I'm so excited to be with you for this podcast episode. I have a very special guest today, and I'd love to tell you a little bit about her. My guest is Jillian Knight. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist who specializes in financial therapy. She is the owner of Her Financial Therapy, PLLC, a virtual psychotherapy practice serving clients in North Carolina and South Carolina. Jillian provides individuals, couples, and group financial therapy from an intersectional feminist lens. Her mission is to help women feel good about their relationship with money. And I love that. To learn more about Jillian and her practice, you can visit her at her website, which is www.herfinancialtherapy.com. You can also follow her on Instagram at herfinancialtherapy. Jillian Knight, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. And I want to let everyone know that the title of today's podcast is It's Not You, It's the System: How We Can Practice Financial Feminism. So that title already is jam-packed with all sorts of goodness, and I can't wait to break it down for everybody. Really excited to have this conversation. And I want to start actually with learning a little bit more about you. And I'm wondering if you could tell our listeners about your story and how you ended up as a financial therapist.
Yeah, sure. So that is a long story that I will try to summarize because I grew up in what I would consider a lower middle class family. When I went to college, didn't have much financial education and ended up borrowing a lot of money to go out of state for college and then out of state again for grad school, and ended up getting licensed as a therapist and sort of following that path. And I worked in a number of different settings, nothing that I was really super excited to be doing. I was just kind of trying to find my place. So kind of alongside this, I met my husband. He went to law school and took out student loans, and neither one of us really knew a whole lot about personal finance or how to talk about money. We came from kind of different families in terms of obviously different families, but our families were different in the way that they handled money. So we had to kind of start figuring that out, how we were going to manage it together. And so about 6 or 7 years ago now, we jumped into the Dave Ramsey plan, which we can talk about because I have lots of feelings about that. Talking about financial feminism.
I have some feelings too.
Yeah, sure you do. But we're in the South. That's what we heard of. We didn't know like who to follow or yeah, that was what was available. We jumped in fully. We got on a budget. We had like a really restrictive budget for like 3 years. We didn't spend much money on anything that wasn't a necessity. And eventually realized how much Dave Ramsey's values do not align with our own, and that there are other ways to manage your money in a more balanced way, and that it was actually doing us more harm than good to stay, kind of involved in that program and sort of system. And so fast forward, and I was thinking maybe I want to be a financial coach, but I also had heard of financial therapy. It's a smaller field that is growing, but it's only been around as like an association, a profession for the past 13 years or so. And so I started to do my own money work and kind of like untangle some of my things that I picked up from my childhood in terms of beliefs about money. A lot of the messages revolved around being a woman and kind of that I should just go find a man to marry and that he would take care of me financially. And so I wouldn't need to be responsible for money. And so I really didn't need to learn about it. And also just like understanding my own stuff, but then also asking my husband and understanding his deeper issues around money that, we all have something that we bring, and realizing that like this could be something that I could really focus a private practice on for therapy, and there weren't that many and still aren't that many people doing it. So there's like a big need for it and not a lot of providers. So I also in there sort of had a conversation with my mom and learned about her experience growing up around money. And I know some of the things about like her current financial situation. And it really just inspired me to want to focus on women and both the at both the individual, but also kind of from a systemic perspective, which is why this topic is so perfect. So that's kind of the long, short version of how I got here.
That's fantastic. So as you were talking, I'm like making all these mental notes because I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much here. So it sounds like, you have a really strong awareness of in the reflection of your past and of your journey. And I think that one thing that I've mentioned in the financial capabilities classes and financial readiness classes that I've taught over the years is your life journey is a financial journey. You mentioned some life milestones that made a really big impact on your finances and maybe the psychology of money for you specifically, right? Your upbringing, your decision to go out of state for school, meeting your partner, deciding to marry your partner, and then both of you learning how to manage your finances together, right? So those are all life milestones, maturing, going off to college, meeting a partner, so on and so forth. And it's like they're also financial milestones too, and they have an impact. And what I want to maybe talk first about, you've done the work yourself. And so you have this perspective having done the work. What is it like to work with the people in your practice who maybe haven't done the work or are just getting introduced to the work for the first time?
Yeah, it's been interesting because I can relate to so much of where they're at because I was there. And not to say that I have completely healed my relationship with money or think that anyone ever does. I think that I am further along than some people, but there are still things that pop up. And I know that every milestone, every like stage of life can bring up other like deeper money work, unexpected things, that I don't even, I can't plan for that could happen that I'm sure would kind of trigger some of my money story that I've worked through. But yeah, it's really interesting because I can relate to where they are and I can also see like where they're trying to get to. And part of my journey involved going through this Dave Ramsey program that involves just like so much shame around money.
Mm.
And so I'm really excited when I meet someone who hasn't gone through that program or like hasn't even heard of him and they haven't gone through that. They've gone through their own shaming of themselves often for a while.
Very typical for us, for any of us to do.
Right. And so knowing that I can have kind of hopefully a positive influence on their story and like partner with them to have more sort of empathy and compassion for themselves around their past experience with money, past decisions they've made, where they're at financially. There's just like so much shame around like I should be doing better or I should have more or I shouldn't still be like struggling with some of the same issues that I have with money. And yeah, so it's been really interesting.
Yeah, and thank you so much for bringing up money shame. And, shame is a human experience. We all have it. And when shame and money are connected, when shame comes up around money, finances, financial decisions, I try to remind clients that in our culture and our society, we're really good at shaming people around money. And that is part of the reason why I call it no shame coaching. And I often remind clients that shame is not a prerequisite for change. In my own upbringing and maturing, shame was definitely a part of, my inner shadow that I had to work with and do a lot of healing with. And what I've discovered is that I used to believe that in order to motivate myself to change, I needed to feel shame, right? I needed to feel, I guess in a way, I needed to feel bad about something. And for me, it was mostly shame. It wasn't really regret or guilt or, not feeling good. It was like a shame response. So as I've gotten older, as I've done the work myself around money, just around emotions, behaviors, and so on and so forth, and as I work with clients, it has become so much more clear to me that you don't have to feel shame to make changes. And if you do feel shame, that shame doesn't need to be wiped clear and clean out of you. It doesn't need to go away for you to start making the change.
Mhm.
And
Yeah. So I think just what I realized was like, I sort of, when I was in the program, I sort of like prided myself on being like disciplined and sacrificing
Mhm.
and like my husband even had and I had a conversation about this about like how we even started like judging other people harsher and like shaming other people for their financial decisions and like that's so unnecessary. I think the biggest thing that I'm just like want people to understand is like you do not have to feel bad while you're paying down your debt or saving up money to get yourself into a better financial situation. Like that's not that's not the way to do it because it doesn't like it might work in the short term, but like there's no reason to feel bad while you're doing it. That doesn't actually, I think, end up creating long lasting change of any kind.
we know that shame, in driving behavior change, shame is not an effective motivator.
Right.
And something that I do when I'm working with coaching clients is, especially when we're building accountability around making a change, I'm careful, in fact, about using the word accountability because sometimes clients associate accountability with, oh, if I don't do this, I'm going to be shamed for not having done it. Right.
Mhm.
So I try to flip it on its head and say, instead, so let's picture you making this change. You nailed it. You did it. You came up with the change yourself. You made a plan and you actually did it. How are you going to celebrate? And it, like, flips the shame equation on its head because it's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, well, if I look at it like, when I nail this, I get to celebrate versus when I don't nail it, I'm gonna be shamed." It's it's gotta be a different energy. I know I haven't done the Dave Ramsey program, but I have heard certain things about it, and I know that there's more of this, like, overarching authoritarian, like, "I am the authority on this, and you've gotta follow this, and if you don't follow it, bad things are going to happen" type of energy going on there, right? And that is definitely not my energy.
I think also it's very focused on that, on like there's only one way to do things and that like you don't do it this way, you're stupid. And it's very like rugged individualism. Like it's like very like focused on the individual without any like consideration of any other systemic factors.
Here we go. Let's get to the meat of this. You said the key words there, systemic factors, because that whole overarching energy of, if you don't do this, it's your fault. I find that energy so damaging. And I think, number one, that just for us as humans, it there's so much there that robs us of the reality of the fact that we are humans that are in systems, and we have to work with those systems and navigate those systems every day. On top of that, for women, those systems are built to oppress us, right? And if we go even into more intersectionality, women who are not part of the dominant white group, so our BIPOC sisters, they have even more intersectional challenges with their positioning. They're up against more oppression. So I think that that rugged individualism really robs us, not just of, it's not an excuse, it's just the reality of, we are human beings in systems. We have to deal with systems every day. And for those of us who are not cishet white men, we are up against more factors of oppression in those systems. That is a reality.
Yeah.
And so let's talk a little bit about the balance between personal responsibility and recognizing the power of systems. And that's kind of the gist of this episode's title, right? It's not you, it's the system. And also, what's the connection there to financial feminism when we can remind the women that we work with, it's not you, it's the system? How do we remind them of that and also balance the agency of making the choices, the individual choices that we need to make around our money?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big question, and one that I think about often. I think that the financial system in and of itself was built by white men for white men, right? So there is not it wasn't built for women to be financially successful. So because I've experienced this like individual perspective, and then because I am a marriage and family therapist and our big, it's based on thinking systemically, there are things that you can do as an individual to improve your financial situation. If you are a woman, especially if you are a woman of color, you have things working against you in those systems that make it harder. Like the deck is stacked against you in some ways. So whether that is the fact that, like, whether that's the wage gap, the wealth gap, which is greater for women of color, whether that is the influence of the childcare system and how women are socialized to be the caregivers. And so then caregiving for children tends to fall on women. And so when that system is not set up in a way so that women can also work and provide for themselves while, making sure that their child is taken care of. And then you look at women are less likely to ask for a raise or negotiate a salary. And when they do, they're looked at more negatively than if a man asks for the same thing. So I think things are getting better, but like there's still so much that we're working against. And so I think it's really helpful because we do get in our own heads. And that's like kind of like also capitalism is like internalized capitalism is a thing. It's essentially asking like, how do we work within capitalism when we don't agree with it? Because it's an oppressive system. So I think it's helpful for people to see the different systems. I was just doing a presentation the other day, and I like had like each like system like as a circle around us, bigger and bigger, to show like these are all the factors on different levels that are impacting our thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and behaviors around money, and also like how much money you're going to make and how you're going to be able to navigate the financial system and your like level of financial wellness. So I think it's helpful for people to see themselves in that context, because my favorite thing that I've ever heard as a marriage and family therapist is everything makes sense in context, right? So there's a reason why like these things are so hard. And it's because it's not you, it's the system, right? So sometimes I feel like, okay, I just don't want to live in the system anymore, right? Like, screw the system. The system like does not help people, not everyone. Like some people benefit from the system and a lot of people don't. So, but this is the system that we're in. So there is some level of acceptance that, you can be in the system while also disagreeing with it and find ways that you can live your life in a way that feels more in alignment with your values. So if that is, and I see you shaking your head, if that means the like where you buy your clothes and how much you like thrifting and buying from sustainable brands as opposed to fast fashion, if it means the companies that you invest money in when in your investments, if you like how much you like sending your kid to a a daycare where like the teachers are really well paid and taken care of. Like these are all places that you can put your money based on what's important to you that help people that are in those systems or help prevent the people from being taken advantage of in those systems.
That is the whole piece is so well said, and I just want to bottle it up and take it away with me after we're done. Yeah, you covered so many good points about, this internalized, and this becomes internalized capitalism is really internalized oppression, right? Oppression happens in the world, and we internalize it as receivers of it because we are in these oppressive systems. So, what you touched on about helping women being able to navigate the systems and being able to make choices in the systems that they feel good about. For me, that's the essence of financial autonomy for women. This is the essence of what I want to do is provide some education because that's also what oppressive systems do is they gatekeep and they keep you from the information and the education you need to participate in the system. So this goes all the way to gendered conditioning we receive as young people. I think there was a giftcards.com survey that I used in one of my presentations that noted that in childhood, young boys are conditioned and they're told that they're expert, basically like wealth generators, like they'll be very financially successful. And young girls are encouraged more so to be conservative and show restraint. So if you think about that, right, even from our younger years, and I'm sure there's many more examples of this, the conditioning is such that someone who has that gendered conditioning that is assigned to individuals of the female sex at birth, you are raised with that conditioning, you will be kept from the information that is helpful to get to know that system and to navigate it and to live your best life in the system, basically. And by live best life, I mean build wealth on your own terms.
Mhm.
So for me, the essence of financial autonomy for women, when I designed this podcast, someone could say, oh, well, that's like rugged individualism. No, it's not, right? Because this is about agency in the systems that we work with and understanding that part of that agency and part of that system's context awareness is making decisions that can lift up other individuals in that system
Mhm.
to kind of have this knock-on effect, this ripple effect outward that when I decide where my money goes out into the world, where it goes, where I point it to can really have an impact in creating more support in such a system.
Yeah. Well, and I would say that's essentially the definition of financial feminism, right?
Yes. Yes. Here we
Yep.
are.
Yeah,
Financial
we got here.
feminism, right?
You said a lot of things that made me think about a lot of things. But yeah, I think also going along with that is I've also heard studies of like boys being raised to play with Legos and being told that, they're better in math when girls are told they're not good at math,
Mhm.
even though that might not actually be the case. I mean, I think it's getting a little better, but when I was growing up, like, and still in a lot of places, girls are given baby dolls and taught how to take care of a baby and that you're going to be a mommy one day. And, we maintain the relationships and we are in charge of making sure everybody's taken care of, whether that's our children, our spouses, or our parents, like, and
Everybody.
everybody. And that's unpaid work.
That's right.
So also, I mentioned socially responsible investing, where you're very intentional about where you are putting your money because you want it to align with your values and what you believe in, and not put money places where it's going to be used for things like violence and guns. And I could go on, but I think that also, so I don't know if you've heard of Ellevest.
I
Sally.
have.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But she talks a lot about the research they've done. I heard her on a podcast the other day. She's talking about, there's this idea that like women having more money means men have less money. And it's not about taking from men to give to women. Like, it's not a pie, right? And that when women have more money, everyone benefits because women are more likely to give money back to their communities,
Mhm.
to be more likely to share their money in a way that benefits everyone, not just like keep it to themselves and focus only on, okay, do I have enough? Like, and do I have what I want? Right? Like, we tend to be more like community focused.
Absolutely. And just to kind of zoom back out a little bit and check in with the listeners as well. So, if you've been listening since the beginning of the podcast, in the first few episodes, I talk about that this podcast is intended to review and touch on the 7 ways that women engage with money. And those 7 ways are earning, spending, saving, investing, borrowing, giving, and manifesting. So you touched right there on the giving aspect. And I love this because, as you mentioned, women are more likely to give in a way that encourages not just the economic, but the quality of life benefit of their communities. And women give charitable contributions are higher amongst women than they are amongst men. That doesn't mean that men don't give. It means that women are more focused on the wealth sharing and the collective and mutual benefit. And that shows up when they pull out their checkbook and they write a check. So much again to unpack there, and this idea that in practicing financial feminism, you can practice it as a financial therapist. I can practice it as a financial coach. Each of us listening can also practice it to, again, tap into that agency, that autonomy that we can have, and quite frankly, the autonomy that we're still fighting for. And also remember that we are in systems. We are people with a position in systems, and we have various intersectionalities depending on our identities. And so, bringing all that together, we can all practice financial feminism. And would you argue that men can practice financial feminism too?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
Just like men can practice feminism in general.
Indeed. We all should be feminists, right? This is not a gendered cause. This is something that is about collective liberation,
Right.
right?
Yeah. We just want it to be an equal playing field. It's not like we want to be above men in some way or like for women to take over the world. I mean, it would be great if we did, but like things are still so imbalanced that, yeah, that like moving towards equity is, I think, like the best way that I try to think about it.
Yeah, and the goal here isn't replacing dominance with dominance, right? The goal here is equity. I mean, one great example is gender pay equity. So we know that women on average make 82 cents, where a man makes $1 in the same job with the same qualifications. That is a problem. The data show it. It is even more egregious for our BIPOC sisters. It's even lower. It's in the 70s and the high 60s. So this means it's not just our wages, it's not just our paychecks that happen to be lower. Because our paychecks turn into contributions to our retirement, which is essentially our net worth and our wealth and our assets, we end up with less wealth. And I know something that this is something big that Sally Krawcheck at Ellevest talks about all the time. Because of the pay gap, then we have less wealth and we actually tend to live longer. Our
And
retirements and our lifespans are longer. So this isn't just a gender pay equity problem. This is a wealth problem. And then this is a threat to sustainability for women in their elder years, really.
yeah, so there's also research on in the corporate world, women are like you're either seen as too young or too old. Women are discriminated against because they're not old enough yet. And then at
Hmm.
some point they're discriminated against because they're too old. And it's like that doesn't happen for men. So what is happening? And the other thing is then if you have a child and you, for any reason, leave the workforce, like if you decide that you're going to stay home for a while or you try to navigate staying home and working or just even being in like what they call childbearing years affects your like hireability. And those things should not happen. Like,
Right.
because I'm capable of having a child should not like count against me
Mhm.
for like obtaining a job.
Right. Doesn't make me a liability, you know? And there's other developed countries that have much better models of celebrating parenthood, also celebrating individuals who are child free and
Mhm.
childless. A lot of it comes back to employment and work, and it's about creating that work life balance where people can know that as humans, they matter and their dignity is intact, whether regardless of their gender and regardless of their choices to maybe be a parent or maybe not, so on and so forth. I always come back to dignity and quality of life. And I think if we create more gender equity, especially in the United States, we would see that rewarded.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah. I think before we wrap up, I would love to ask you, we've talked a lot about like a lot of this conversation has been mostly philosophical. It's been highly intellectual, right? Let's get to some practical stuff, right? So
Yeah.
if I'm a client or if I'm a woman listening, somebody listening and saying, "Hey, like what are the steps that I can take to step into the empowerment of my own choices, of my financial autonomy, and also be aware of the systems at work that are here and that I'm a part of, and like how do I make it work for me? What are some practical things we can do?"
Yeah. I mean, I think like with a lot of therapy work, it starts with awareness.
Mhm.
I know in my own work, I like started by kind of journaling out different points of my life that related to money. And then like whether that involved like really strong feelings or like an impact it had on my life or things that may have related to how I think about money now and just like wrote those things out and then went back and looked over them to look for patterns, but also like where's like the gender issues here and where are the issues of any big important factors. So we didn't get into like financial trauma, but there can be like little T trauma and big T trauma. So like things that I didn't realize were financial trauma I experienced. And when you don't realize that you've experienced that and that that's why you do some of the things you do, it's really helpful to have that like initial level of awareness. So things like my parents divorced when I was young and my family's experience of the recession in 2008 and just like the conversations I overheard as a kid about money and connecting all those things and like the expectations that I took on, either recognizing what I took in from media that I was exposed to and the message that I got. Maybe I didn't know exactly where it came from, but just anything that kind of writing out that story, you can start to see some awareness of, okay, well, that's making more sense as to where that's coming from. And recognizing, starting to just like look for these things. You know, that when I first learned like the impact of marketing on on my own spending habits, like that was something I became more aware of listening to the radios, like people trying to sell me things, noticing where some of that is happening in your life. Yeah. I think the awareness has been probably the biggest thing for me. And then like forgiving your parents and forgiving yourself for past financial decisions or for learning what you learned. You learn this, then like accepting that that's your story. So I'd say like awareness, acceptance, and like what do you need to go forward? What
Hmm.
what would you like? How would you like to interact with money?
Mhm.
I think that is probably where I would start.
Sounds like awareness, forgiveness, which is really acceptance, right?
Mhm.
And then also like turning the view not towards the past, but the future. And that's really where the choice comes in and the autonomy comes in. It's like, okay, I've reconciled this at least internally, maybe externally. We may never externally reconcile whatever trauma we have with, however that trauma showed up in our lives. But internally we can find some peace. And then we can, with that peace, we can better turn to the future, make the choice of how do I want my future to look. So you've raised up so many good things. And I just want to emphasize also for anybody listening, this can be heavy duty inner work. And this is why there are financial therapists like Jillian. And for myself, I call myself a trauma aware coach. I'm not a licensed clinician. I do practice therapy, but I know enough about money and emotions and behaviors and how we swim in these waters of being human to know that this stuff is real. And I also remind people we are not built to do hard things alone.
Mm.
So if you find yourself, taking a dive into this process of awareness building, journaling is a great process for that. This is why people recommend that you journal. Number one, you get to purge what's inside of you. Sometimes we need a good purge every once in a while. And then, most of all, you create awareness. You get to separate yourself from emotions and behaviors and resentments. And you get to see things with a little bit more clarity, a little bit more distance. So you build that awareness. You can forgive those things that happen, which is really accepting it. And
Which
then
I will say, I made it sound super easy and
yes.
oversimplified there a little
Yes.
bit. It's quite a process
Yeah.
that, it's taken time to get to where you're at. It's going to take some time and some healing to get to where you want to be.
Thank you. We are not meant to do hard things alone, and these hard things are going to take time. And this is why we need good people to we don't have to go in there alone. We can go in with good people, good experts, good practitioners, and practice that willingness to get into the space to get to that point where we're feeling really good about what's in front of us. I have so many good feelings about this discussion. I think we have covered a lot of ground, and I really appreciate everything that you brought, Jillian, to our discussion. Jillian, thank you again for joining me in this talk. And I am going to make sure for everybody listening out there, all of Jillian's information is going to be in the show notes. So make sure to find her at her website and follow her on Instagram. And as always, listeners, as always with finances, be kind to yourself, seek support when you need it, and let me know how it goes. We'll see you next time.